We got JJK 269 coming out this week, the first of the final 3 chapters, and as we're approaching the ending, I decided to revisit the beginning, and I've noticed some interesting things, so today we're going to talk about it, but spoilers. Alright, so the first thing I want to do in this video is just give this disclaimer that this is just purely fun speculation on my part, again looking back to the beginning and drawing parallels with what's happening right now in the story. Could there be something here? Maybe, but not necessarily at all. So I just don't want people to get their expectations set for one thing and then be disappointed if that doesn't play out, because I fear that that has led to a lot of disappointment for JJK fans, and I don't want to contribute to that. So this is just purely fun speculation here. Know that going in. So like I mentioned, this week we'll see the release of chapter 269, the third to last chapter. So I thought it would be interesting to go revisit the third chapter of JJK. And as you can see, it was titled For Myself, and it opens with Yuji visiting his grandfather's grave. So I thought it would be really interesting if perhaps 269 opened with Yuji visiting his grandfather's grave and perhaps revisiting the entire thing that spurned this adventure, right? Those final words from his grandfather about living for others and helping others when you can. Like, we know that Yuji has learned a lot since that moment, so it would be kind of a nice full circle for perhaps him to revisit and fill in his grandfather on what he's learned, right? Or perhaps maybe a bit of a skew on this parallel could be that Yuji is visiting Gojo's grave, if he is indeed, put to rest ultimately in this episode. But I think the grandfather parallel might be a bit more powerful. The next interesting thing I noticed is that chapter 3 is actually the first time we see Sukuna do this. Yes, we knew that Yuji was Sukuna's vessel. He had already eaten 2 of his fingers by this point, but we didn't know that he was capable of creating a mouth on Yuji and speaking to them. So this moment serves as kind of like a shock and reveal. So I thought it would be an interesting parallel if in the third to final chapter, we perhaps got the reveal that Sukuna is still living on within Yuji. Now, for those of you who haven't seen my videos where I talk about that a little bit more in depth, essentially, I don't think Sukuna died here. I do think Yuji reconsumed him and they're going on to live together, because at least personally, I think that would make the most sense for the conclusion to their arc that Gege has been setting up for this entire manga. And I feel like it makes the most sense with the growth that we've seen from Yuji. The one to teach you about love is, you guys get the picture. And I also think there's some interesting artistic symbolism here in the fact that we have Yuji's one hand that is his human hand, and then, the one hand that is still wearing the curse tool. It's kind of like human and curse living together. Now, the rest of chapter 3 is all about Yuji getting introduced to the Jujutsu school, right? And that takes the shape of Gojo taking him to Principal Yaga's in order to take the entrance exam. And what's interesting here is this starts by saying, Satoru, you're late. You're late by 8 minutes. And granted, this might be a bit of a stretch, but interestingly, in chapter 268, there is an emphasis put on the fact that they could be running late, and we see a clock that is seemingly roughly 8 or 9 minutes before the hour. So, 8 minutes late, 8 minutes early, and they're headed to the Yuta Okotsu situation, which is the whole Gojo body swap situation, right? So could there be something there? Maybe. Now, regardless of all of the clock stuff, the moment I find most interesting is that this serves as Yuji's introduction to Yaga and the cursed corpses, right? So what if there was a parallel to 269 in that cursed corpses and that technology is what needs to be used to solve or, save this Yuta Gojo situation? And oh yeah, the moment that immediately precedes this in chapter 3 just so happens to be the I'd win moment. So make of that what you will. And speaking of Gojo, we first get introduced to him in chapter 2 of the manga, in this panel specifically, where he says to Yuji, good morning, which one are you right now between Yuji and Sukuna, right? So I thought it would be a really cool parallel if this was swapped and, Yuji or someone else is saying like, good morning to Yuta Gojo and is saying, which one are you right now? Now, again, I feel like I got to give another temper your expectations warning, because this is purely fun speculation. Who says Gege is going to do anything with paralleling chapters, right? But since Gojo was introduced in the second chapter, perhaps he would be reintroduced in the second to last chapter. And that would maybe even make sense for the 8-minute late thing. Like in the third chapter, Gojo was 8 minutes late, right? So in the third to last chapter, he doesn't quite show up, but shows up in the second to last chapter. Well, for all my skeptics out there, don't worry. That is where the far-reaching theories end for this video. And instead, I want to point out one final parallel that is really cool from chapter 2. This is the moment where Gojo shows up to help Yuji and Megumi because, you know, the two of them have been fighting that curse. And I think Megumi's wounds in this second chapter are very reminiscent of the scars he is going to end up with from Sukuna. They're not exact, but I do think there's intentionality there because they're pretty close. As I'm sure you guys know by now, I just love diving into these details. So as we approach the end, I'm having a good time looking back. And you know, whether or not these things were intentional parallels, we'll have to see. But it's just fun, right? And additionally, I should say, it's not an exact like third chapter to final chapter parallel, but we obviously had Megumi and Nobara introduced very early on in the story, and here at the end we have had their reintroductions, right? So you know, I definitely think some of those things are there, and we'll have to see for these final 3 chapters what else may or may not have been intentional. So y'all let me know y'all's thoughts down below, and then for the rest of this video I'm going to answer a few questions I've gotten. So we'll start here with this one from Iris, and as you guys can see, this is a long one. So first up, pause to read this. And then here is the rest as well. So y'all can pause to read this too. But essentially what Iris is talking about is curse technique reversals and perhaps why we haven't seen that many in the manga. And Iris actually does a really good write-up here that I love. It's basically about you need to have the ability to conceptualize what the reverse is. And it's kind of an ego thing, a characterization thing, and that might be why we've only seen Gojo and Geto do it. In addition to any perhaps meta reasons, you know, whether or not Gege liked it, what have you. I really enjoy this explanation. And the TLDR down here is basically that if you're unable to embrace and conceive of the duality of your nature, you can't reverse your technique. Only Gojo and Kenjaku have shown willingness to give up ego for their goals. So I love this. And speaking of reversals, Davi here says, would the reversal of the sugar guy technique be to infuse salt into somebody? And I don't know, I would love to know. Just give somebody like a sodium overdose. That would certainly be pretty effective, honestly, like depending on how quickly he could inject it into somebody. But his reversal could also be the ability to like remove sugar from people. And if he can jumpstart people's brain, well, maybe not jumpstart's the best word, but if he can like keep people's brains operating by injecting sugar, if he can remove it, then he might be able to just shut the lights out, which, you know, maybe we're sleeping on Sugar Guy. Next up, M. Ivory asks, if a Zenin and Gojo clan member had a kid, what do you think their abilities would be? And yeah, I think the best possible merging of those two families would be a 6 Eyes 10 Shadows user, right? And he says, do you think a 10 Shadows 6 Eyes user would be better than a 6 Eye Limitless user? And honestly, no, I don't. I think Limitless is the best curse technique in the game. And so I think Limitless 6 Eyes is just like the best package. Like it's better than 6 Eyes 10 Shadows. But don't get me wrong, like a 6 Eyes 10 Shadows user is insane. They are the strongest person on the planet if that happened, like assuming Sukuna doesn't exist, right? But since we know there can only be one 6 Eyes at a time, if there is a 6 Eyes 10 Shadows user, there is no 6 Eyes Limitless user, right? So yeah, they are definitely built different. They are going to be insane. And honestly, any curse technique with the 6 Eyes is going to be insane. If you even just have the 6 Eyes and you don't have a curse technique, but assuming you still have cursed energy, you're going to be insane, right? But yeah, 10 Shadows, 6 Eyes would be crazy. And what do I think the clans would do if somebody had that kid? That would be interesting because I definitely think that person would be the clan head, most likely. But depending on the politics involved for like the mom and dad, they may argue over which clan that kid gets to be the clan head of. I would imagine it would probably be whoever the father was a member of a clan of, because the Jujutsu Society does seem to be very patriarchal and misogynistic at that. So, you know, if it was a Gojo clan father, he'd probably be Gojo clan head. If it was a Zenin clan father, perhaps he'd be Zenin clan head. But I bet they would like perhaps even battle and, you know, go to war over that. If not directly, then indirectly. But yeah, it would be really cool to see. And then finally from 844 here, he's got 2 questions. The first being, after the manga ends, can you talk about the setups or Chekhov's guns that were never fired or addressed? And yeah, I do plan on making a video once the series is over and we've gotten everything that we're going to get to talk about some of the things that I really wished had been addressed. But obviously we can't talk about that till it ends because we don't know what's going to happen until it's over, right? So yeah, I do plan on making something like that. And then the second question is, among the 3 Boogie Woogie fake outs, how would I rank them? Like, what's my favorite? And definitely the Mahito one is the best for me. It was just so cathartic, and the Sukuna one calling back to that just made that one sweeter as well. That's all for this one, y'all. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for watching.